Welcome to
Tamarindo Podcast.
Hosted by me, Brenda Gonzalez, a political nerd and nonprofit capacity builder.
And me, Ana Sheila Victorino, a queer well-being enthusiast and mindset coach. We are a Latinx empowerment podcast discussing politics, culture, and how to keep your calma with well-being practices and self-love.
Our mission is to use laughter and conversation to inform and inspire. For us, self-care and advocacy go hand in hand.
We want you to be your best you, so together we can build more inclusive communities.
Welcome to the show. Woo! On this episode of Tamarindo, you will first hear Ana Sheila and I reflect on the concept of fearlessness, the price of authenticity, and then we talk about why we admire stand-up comics so much. And today we have two stand-up comics that we get to speak to. So you're going to first hear from Christina Catherine Martinez, who is a writer, actor, award-winning art critic, and comedian living in Los Angeles. She's been named both a comedian you should know by Vulture and a comic to watch by TimeOutLA. She's just awesome. You'll hear a lot about her in just a second. And then we also talked to our good friend Ingrid Cruz, who's a freelance writer, director, and comedian from El Salvador and raised in the U.S., and she currently lives and works in Buenos Aires, Argentina. You can read Ingrid's work at Latina Media Co, Refinery 29, and BusinessInsider. Hey, Tamarindo Podcast, amiguis. If you are on video, I don't know if you're already on video. We're trying this new thing. So audio folks, hello, it's normal episode as usual. Visual folks, we're going to try something with video, so you might see our faces. Hi, Ana Sheila, ¿cómo estás?
What's up? I'm doing well. How are you, Brenda?
I'm okay. It only took 2 hours to set this up, so I'm doing good. I'm doing good.
Appreciate you. We're trying to get with the times, y'all, and it's a struggle. It's a struggle.
Yeah, since all y'all are on video, so notice that YouTube, you need to be on video. So you all need to make us YouTube stars. Yes. So that's your to-do. So
I have to like brush my hair every time.
I know. I have to put makeup on. This is why we got into podcasting. At least for me, I was like, I don't have to put makeup on. This is great. But now I have to put makeup on. This is bullshit. So, but anyways, it's always a good time when we get together.
But you know what? Now after this, we look cute wherever else.
Well, we're gonna take some pictures. We're taking some pictures because I'm not wasting this great light and this makeup.
Yes. So what I'm gonna do is every time we're recording, I'm gonna have some cute plans after to make. You know, to make the most of my outfit.
Yeah. Well, the problem is I have 3 outfits, so now I have to like buy more. Like literally, you can probably count in your hand my 3 outfits.
I think I know all your clothes.
Because I don't like spending money that much on clothes. And so my 3 outfits, y'all are going to get to see, I guess, 2 more. Anyways, enough about that. So we've got some great guests today, and you'll hear about them in just a little bit. But I was noticing, Ana Sheila, that we tend to have a lot of comics. A lot of women comics, a couple dudes, but a lot of women comics.
Yes.
And I'm curious, I mean, I'm just guessing, but I feel that I'm attracted to comics because they're so like fearless, they're breaking barriers. So I'm curious, what about comics makes you excited?
What about comics makes me excited?
I wonder why we have so many on the show is my question to you.
I mean, I think because we love funny.
Yeah, absolutely. We love funny. To me, I think they're like fearless. I don't know. Does that word come to mind when you think of comics?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I feel like, like you have to be brave. You have to be courageous to get in front of an audience like that. And you have to be so vulnerable. I think more vulnerable than we are on this podcast, right? I mean, I feel very vulnerable on this podcast, but to do it in front of a stage, like that's a whole nother
And we've done it a couple of times, which is terrifying, but yeah.
I'm excited. Are you trying to do, I know you wanted to do stand-up,
one of these days, and maybe one of these gals today will inspire me. So absolutely, I think we are online here in what we like about comics. Of course, they're funny, especially when they're women of color, they're breaking barriers. They are, have a clear point of view. All the things that I admire in people and I want to model, comics have it. So I love to be surrounded by them. I think they have great energy. And so really this concept of being fearless is something that runs through in these 2 gals that you're about to meet. And let's just kind of like meditate on that, on what it means to be fearless. I know you mentioned a few months ago that you're trying to harness this energy, me vale energy. What does that mean?
Yeah, so I feel like my goal now is not to be fearless, but rather to be able to recognize fear and work past it, you know, because like having fear, like that's a human thing, to be scared. I mean, our body, our mind, our soul is often, it's trying to protect us. Right. And that's where fear comes from, right? It's like, do you want to do that? Are you going to be like, I'm trying to keep you safe. Right. But sometimes, like, in order to do what we want to do, we have to recognize that fear and overcome it. And so for me, it's been about recognizing that fear and doing it anyways. Right. And I think that that's what brave people do. That I don't think these comics, I don't think a lot of folks that have a lot of visibility or putting themselves out there aren't scared. They're just recognizing that and doing it anyways, because that's what makes them happy. That's what fulfills them. And I think that's really, really inspiring. And I think something that someone said a few days ago that really resonated with me, they said, you know, there is a price that you pay in order to be yourself or do what you want to do, right? Because when you're really being yourself and really going after what you really want to do, or even being your true self might mean that you can't be in certain spaces. Right. And so there's a price that you pay to be yourself. There's a price that you pay to do what you really truly want to do, and you have to decide if that price, what that price is, what that cost is, and what that price is. Right. And that might mean that you do something and that people are going to judge you. So I think that we all get to decide what is that price and what is that cost for us. And I was thinking about this and I was like, well, how do you determine when a price is too,
when the price is right,
or the price is too high? And for me, what I've realized is when you feel like there's like a gnawing in you, that something you're like, I really like, there's something that is, you're feeling resistance to doing something, you're feeling a gnawing, then that's how you know that that the price is too high, you know, and that means that you get to go for it and you get to put yourself in front of folks.
Or do you mean that the price is worth it? Not too high, but that the price is worth it?
Or I guess that the price of you not being yourself,
right,
or you not doing what you want to do, that's the price that's too high.
So if it's gnawing, it means that it is worth you being yourself. If it's gnawing at you, it is worth it.
And that you need to put yourself in. And if you're feeling that and you're feeling like you're not, like something doesn't feel right, then you know you need to put yourself in a different environment. You know that you need to go after that thing that you've been wanting to go after. Even if la gente va a decir lo que la gente diga, but you've determined that the price of you not doing that is too high. And what are we doing on this earth if we're not doing this is our one precious life. And if we're not doing what are being called to, then
what the hell's the point? Ana Sheila, what is the point?
What's the point? So I love to see comics. I love to see folks that are in high visibility, because I know what that takes, right? And we only do it in a smaller way with this podcast, but we're doing it too, you know. And so comics, I think, is like a whole nother level. And
that's why we admire them. Perfectly put. And exactly that is what you're all going to take away when you hear from our guest today. But first, we're going to hear from Christina Catherine Martinez, who is a writer, actor, award-winning art critic, and comedian living in Los Angeles. You can read more about her in our description of this podcast, and you're going to hear a lot about her in just a second. But I'm so excited for this conversation, y'all. I love this comic. She stood out from the first time that I saw her. I saw her probably like 4 or 5 years ago at, of course, Women Crush Wednesdays, because I'm obsessed with that comedy. It's the best. It is the absolute best comedy show. By the way, you all need to save the date. Women Crush Wednesdays, it is the best show ever. I always talk about it. But they are so good that they're going to be at the Ford Theater this summer in August. Y'all can get the tickets already. We'll put the links in the, whatever. We'll hook you up. We'll hook you up with the information. But that is how amazing that night is, that they have this outdoor venue for folks that are not from LA. This is a huge outdoor venue for a comedy show that I used to go to in a tiny basement.
You're like an OG fan.
I am an OG.
They should have you.
She absolutely knows
you backstage. She should have you backstage.
They're like, who's been here before? I'm like, obviously, thank you. I'm always there. It's amazing and it's great. But I want to say that this comic, Christina Catherine Martinez, she stood out from when I first saw her because she's not just a comic, she is a clown. And you're going to hear a little bit of what that means. Like, there is the art of clowning and the physicality. And there's just so much beyond just stand-up comedy. You're all are going to love this conversation. You are all going to love this conversation right now with Christina Catherine Martinez. Let's just hear from her now. Welcome, Christina Catherine Martinez de Tamarindo. It is so great to have you here.
Thank you.
Well, I'm a huge fan. Been loving your shows, your comedy. Super awesome. So I'm excited to introduce more people to you. And a little bit of your background that I know from comedy shows is that you grew up in East LA, that you grew up in a very conservative, very religious family, and somehow you became an art critic. So I'd love to know how you got into becoming an art critic.
Yeah, it was really out of nowhere. I mean, I didn't know what I wanted. I think I knew what I wanted to do. You know, I always wanted to be a performer or an actress of some kind. And I just thought it was normal that like all kids think about that. And then it's just, you grow up and then it's like, that's not a real thing that you can do. You know what I mean?
Like it's harder. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it just wasn't ever part. I think it's part of the reality of of being born and raised in LA, but not part of the industry, you know, growing up working class in LA, growing up not, just attached to the industry or the entertainment industry in any way. And I think I just was so lost after high school and dropping out of college for the first time and moving back further into LA. I think I grew up in like Boyle Heights and then also Whittier. And at some point after I dropped out of college for the first time, I was just living at my parents' house, and which was fine. You know, Mexicans love to have you stay in the house until you're married. I knew that I didn't know what I want to do, but I wasn't going to figure it out there. So even just as like a halfway move, I moved out. I moved to Silver Lake.
So like far away, but still out.
So it kind of just the 20 miles made all the difference. I moved to Silver Lake and I started working at Fred Siegel in West Hollywood. Just, you know, figuring out how to support myself, you know, without having gone to college or anything like that. And frankly, just meeting people through that store. I got an internship at a magazine because I also always wanted to be a writer. Working at a particular magazine was not quite what I imagined. And then I was talking to my neighbor at the time, who happens to be an art critic. And I was just sort of complaining about, you know, I always wanted to work in fashion and work at this fashion magazine, and it's not as engaging as I thought it would be. And I know I want to write, but I don't know what kind of writer that is or what that looks like. And he just said, you know, well, why don't you try writing about art? Like you might find it more engaging or fulfilling because it's kind of difficult. I really just fell into it. I don't know any critic or any child or person who like dreams of becoming an art critic. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and also I think it felt like it definitely was. And I mean, it's being a part of the art world is still a huge part of what I do. You know, it felt like I had access to sort of a cultural community that was really exciting, that was really glamorous, but also I was doing something respectable. I think even then I was still trying to do something like respectable that would reflect well on my family, you know, and I was afraid of that and it took a long time to slowly move out of that and become, you know, the kind of like comedian that I am today, you know, titties out on stage, pouring condiments all over my boobs and other parts of my body and just telling jokes and being really silly. And I'm still an intellectual, just for the readers.
FYI, so you all know.
FYI.
She's still an intellectual.
Still an intellectual, but yeah.
Yeah, I love you describing what you do because it is such a departure from an art critic, at least it seems to me, to now you're a clown. You're our very first clown on Tamarindo. So I'm so excited to have you. Tell me a little bit about what drew you to the art of being a clown and what is that? How do you explain that to people that are not familiar with this art form?
Yeah, I think it's a form of comedy or maybe just entertainment or performance writ large. I actually, you know, I came from stand-up. When I started doing comedy, I was doing pure stand-up, and this is my clown origin story. I was doing even then I had no frame of reference at all. I didn't know anything really about comedy when I started doing it. I just was very unhappy in my hyper intellectual life, and I needed something else. So I Googled Los Angeles open mics, and I went to the first one that was nearest my house. And even then I was trying a lot of things that were maybe weird or not necessarily right for an open mic or a bar show, but I just didn't know that there was any other place to do anything different. And then one day I did a stand-up show at the Lyric Hyperion. This is pre-pandemic. It was under different ownership. And one of the who eventually came to be one of the owners of the Lyric Hyperion, Phil Brown, Phil Burgers, aka Dr. Brown, who was, a clown in Europe and had toured a lot over there. And he had just moved to LA and was teaching clown classes. He came up to me after the show and said, "Hey, that was a really great set." And I was like, "Thanks." And he goes, "You got the clown in you." I was like, "Okay, buddy," because I had no idea who he was. And if you've ever seen him, he's very has crazy hair and a big beard, and I thought he was an unhoused member of the community. So this weird this sort of feral man came up to me after a stand-up show and was like, "I think you have the clown in you." And I was like, "Okay, buddy." And he goes, "You should take my clown class." And I was like, "Sure thing." But then I did, and there's a lot of options for clown classes and introductory things and short-term workshops, but back then there wasn't. This was 6 or 7, maybe at least 6 years ago now. There wasn't a lot. Clown did not have the reputation or the sort of visibility that it has in LA now. That was really sort of the beginning. So his class was this very intense. It was like 10 hours a week for 6 weeks. It felt very much like it was a comedy workshop, but it also felt deeper like an acting workshop. It was very much the break you down to build you back up. A lot of crying, a lot of intensity, a lot of tears. But I think eventually I've hopefully been able to just fold that into who I am as a stand-up and as a writer and even as a person. I've tried to define it in many ways. And a lot of people, when they see something, they're like, "Well, what makes that a clown bit as opposed to, a sketch or just some stand-up?" And it's tricky because it's more of I think it's just a quality that pretty much any comedian can have. But I always but clown tends to emphasize, in terms of comedy and performance, tends to emphasize really radical presence, vulnerability, openness, just a different relationship to failure and to bombing. Which is always that if you're bombing, we call it being in the shit. It's never a bad thing. It's always like learning to be excited about that, because when you're doing that badly, then you can only go up. Or when you're doing that badly and you have to be nimble on your feet and reorient, that's when you actually are going to find something new. So it's learning to see those things as gifts and not just crumble. It's really letting go of your own ego. I think it's letting go of a lot of the ingrained tropes we have. However you were trained, it's a lot of letting that go. So for us as a stand-up, is letting go of that that punchline setup rhythm where it's like, if you're not getting a laugh every 10 seconds, you're bombing. That's really hard to let go of as a clown, and especially as someone who still performs a lot in stand-up spaces. So I always think of it as everyone has their inner clown, which is your truest self as a performer. So your clown is whatever that self is after every bullshit socialized aspect of your personality and what you were taught to think of that a comedian should be. When all that's cleared away, you just have this really pure performer self that is your clown. And then, there is definitely a discipline to learning how to create bits from that place that are going to be repeatable, sustainable, presentable, to an audience.
Yeah. It's fascinating. I'm so glad that this is wonderful, because this is what the vision that I had in speaking to you is to talk about. Because I am not from this world. I was actually really intimidated to talk to you because I'm not an art critic. I don't have those points of reference. At least that's how I think of myself. But I I find your performance and your artwork like fearless, totally fearless. And so hearing what it really takes, I mean, it's such a perfect metaphor for life, you know, getting in the shit and getting out of it.
It is. I think getting into clown work made me, you know, I don't want to say better person, but helped me, in my life, just be more accepting of myself. And of course that carries over. It's actually, it's a really particular type of genius to just be that simple and that yourself without that directly yourself in front of someone. It's actually really difficult to be stupid in that genius, obvious way. And I brought a lot of my, you know, art critic intellectual bullshit to my comedy. You know, very early on, had this chip on my shoulder about, I really want to be, you know, a smart stand-up. And it sort of worked on one level, but it wasn't really true to me. I was like neglecting this whole other side of myself, who is a fucking idiot, you know?
Shedding all those shields and just being.
Yeah, and she deserves to be seen as much as my brain does.
I love that.
It's you know, it's modernism and farts. It's, you know, it's feminism and, you know, fake blood coming out of my vagina or something. You know, this is also the thing that I find tricky, is that the closer it is, I do find a little bit of like something kind of that's almost impossible to articulate, which I also appreciate as someone who sort of spent 10 years learning how to, making a living talking about art and analyzing art and thinking about this stuff, quote unquote, critically. You know, there's something about the closer that I bring that to what I do, it sort of like takes away the magic. So it also is now this like clown and maybe comedy writ large is like this safe space from my critical brain.
Yeah.
I can't go there because it ruins the magic. Or if I do go there, all I can do is talk about how stupid it is to go there. And then that becomes the bit, you know?
Mm-hmm. Which I think is very much what was the bit, I think, in your performance, Aesthetical Relations, which was phenomenal and really cool. And like, I got a friend to come with me, and I'm like, it's going to be funny. It's going to be weird, but it's going to be funny. And she loved it. And like me, not an art critic, that's the way I would describe it.
Yeah, it is. It became, because that particular theater, Red Cat, is a performance art theater. So I knew that there was going to be a lot of art people there. So it was nice to sort of relax into some of those weirder references that I knew that crowd would get. But I also it was very intentionally loose and unplanned in a lot of places, because I also just wanted to see how stupid I could get in this, you know, quote unquote, fancy performance art space. It was pretty dumb. I'm glad you love that. I will say something about fearlessness, because I think that's something people say to me a lot, or that's something they see in what I do. And it's not that the fear isn't there. I'm scared all the time. I just do it anyway, or I've learned to really think about where that fear is coming from. And if it's coming from a place of, you know, my bullshit socialized self, where I'm afraid of looking a certain way, or I need to control how the audience sees me, that's maybe unproductive fear. And then there's that fear of like knowing that you are going to do something really honest and stupid in a way that is very true to yourself. And that kind of fear is, I don't want to say productive, but it becomes like, it's disappointing. I'm like, when I'm really afraid of doing something, sometimes that's actually the sign that I need to do it. You know, not that it always succeeds. And, you know, it's not like you get rewarded for this all the time. Sometimes I'm afraid to try something because I think it's going to fail, and then it does, and then it sucks. But, you know, it's just funny how it comes off as fearlessness, because I am afraid all the time. I just don't try not to let it stop me from doing what I want to do.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I am so excited about all that. How does it feel for you? I mean, the other reason that I saw your comedy the first time with Marcela Arguello, Woman Crush Wednesdays, many years ago, way pre-pandemic, when it was back at the Nerdist, I think, it was a smaller venue.
Yeah, that was the last show that was at Nerdist before it closed down. And I remember that was a good show. And also because it was about to shut down, I think they ignored the sort of fire code capacity limits and just it was packed to the gills. I remember that. It was a relatively small venue, but it was full. It was like double capacity or something ridiculous that night.
Yeah, and it was great because you could bring your own alcohol. It was awesome. Such a great time.
Yeah, it was a free-for-all.
It was amazing. And of course, your performance stood out because it wasn't just speaking with the mic. It was very physical. You had like this baby doll voice and you stood out. And I was like, oh my gosh, I got to follow this comic because I'm also always looking to meet more Latinas that are doing amazing, fearless things. So how does it feel for you to occupy these spaces? I don't see very many Latinas that are art critics or very many Latinas that have their own solo performance clown show in a space that's not where we're not normally seen. So what does it feel like to be that?
I mean, to be honest, I think there was a period where I don't even think deliberately, but subconsciously didn't think about, my identity that way. And that's something that a lot of people have to do when they want to get into cultural spaces, like especially the art world.
This episode of Tamarindo is supported by Topo Chico Hard Seltzer. Today and every day at Tamarindo, we love to celebrate authenticity and the special qualities and experiences that empower us and set each of us apart. Something I'm proud of is how growing up as a queer Mexican immigrant has given me a broader perspective and an empathy toward different identities, experiences, and preferences. We're proud to partner with Topo Chico Hard Seltzer because they know that authenticity doesn't just appear out of nowhere. Authenticity is something deeply rooted within you that can take hard work and something that you get to celebrate each and every day. Topo Chico Hard Seltzer brings authenticity to the world of hard seltzers with 125 years of history and refreshing Mexican and Texan-inspired flavors to celebrate those who are siempre diferente. And I'm all about savory and sabroso, so I love the Topo Chico classic flavor with real lime juice and tequila flavor. And speaking of authentic, what I love even more is that it has real lime juice because we say putting limon on everything, so we can tell when it's real. It's refreshing, it's citrusy, tart, and I like to imagine myself on a beach in Oaxaca when I drink it because, ¿por qué no? But if y'all have that sweet tooth, there are so many other flavors that you can try. Experience a hard seltzer that's always diferente with Topo Chico Hard Seltzer. Go to topochicohardseltzerusa.com/tamarindo to find where you can get yours today. That's topochicohardseltzerusa.com/tamarindo. Flavored beer, TC Hard Seltzer Co., Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Celebrate responsibly.
I will say especially artists, people of color. I talk to a lot of artists, comedians and artists alike in both worlds who then feel like we have to navigate this line between suppressing certain parts of our identities versus then playing with those and then also being pigeonholed as only that, right? So it's tricky because there is like, I'm a Latina and I'm also a clown and I'm also this, and it's just like one ball in this like huge juggling act of identities that I'm always doing, and some push forward at other parts and some recede. I also had that thing where, because I was born here and I don't speak Spanish and I have light skin, the classic cut between two worlds. Right. Where according to my, my brown Spanish speaking family, that it's like, well, you're white, you're not really Mexican, but, being around actual white people, of course they see me as ethnic in some way. So the idea of whiteness was very weird to me. And I just like didn't touch on that for a long time, but now it's very funny. So I have been in the past year or so, I would say, in a way that I haven't been before. I've been talking more about being Mexican, growing up Mexican, just a little bit more personal, but in a really, hopefully, I think, in a really stupid way. And then they lead into these asides that get really absurd So then it becomes unclear, well, which parts are actually true or from her biography. And then where's that line of like, there's always a certain point in the stuff that I'm writing now where it becomes so absurd. It's clear that I'm, making things up or it's part of this act, but it's always unclear like when that point happens, which I really enjoy because, I think I said this at that show years ago, I think identity is a racket. So I refuse to settle in any one for too long.
Yeah, no, it is. When you really break it down, it is absurd. It is.
It's a racket. I mean, and it's not that I think for a while it may be suppressing that frankly did come from a place of shame. And now it just comes from a place of being just a little bit more solid in who I am as a particular person. And always feeling like I was just interviewed for some other magazine and the woman came into my house and was like, I love that I can immediately tell this is a Mexican woman's house. And I was like, really? And she was noticing all the like decor and the things that I get because I go to Mexico City a lot, which I love because it actually is a lot of the stuff in my house is like Mexican stuff, but it's also Mexican tourist stuff, which also feels kind of playfully true to me, like being a tourist in my own homeland or being a tourist in my own ethnicity.
Yeah, that's so perfect. I'm thinking she went in and opened up your oven and saw all the extra cookware.
Extra cookware? No, I actually use my oven.
You're not a real Latina then.
Now it's so funny. I'm sure you can tell, like, just very, very interested in stereotypes. The aesthetical relations plays off of like certain stereotypes about like the talk show host and the look of it. She's also very inspired by like, 80s talk show hosts, especially like Spanish ones, that were very flashy. I finally, and there are things that I do very naturally that I sort of recognize as, I always felt to myself like, oh, I don't have an ethnicity. I don't really have a culture. Like, the things that I do, we never really owned them in a big way. So I just assumed that's how everybody lives, or like, this is what it's like to be American. And then I, bought my first tortilla press the other day, and I'm making my own tortillas. And you just can't run away from how you grew up, on some level.
You can't fight it. You're gonna make your own tortillas at some point.
Yeah, and that's fine. And I like balancing that. There are definitely certain parts of how I grew up that I needed to just like break away from, like spiritually, emotionally, logistically. But the more I separate, the more I sort of define myself apart from my upbringing, then like the freer I am to just like take the things that work. But which is the tortillas.
Yeah. I love that. I want to know, like, because again, so a lot of these little tidbits I know from watching your comedy and seeing you perform. You also talk about being homeschooled, which I think is fascinating as well. Like, well, tell me a little bit more about the way you grew up is also just unique. Everybody's experience is unique.
Yeah, everybody's is
extremely unique to be homeschooled.
Yeah, this is also what's fun to think about. There's so much that's universal and particular about how we grow up, and the more that I talk about this, being biracial, caught between two worlds, I don't think it's hack, but it is a subject matter that I'm hearing a lot more of. And it's fun to feel like, oh yeah, not that I feel alone, but I'm like, oh, I'm glad this stuff works, because clearly a lot of people have had this experience. But then also everyone has their weird particular thing. Yeah, I grew up homeschooled I think I even flattened this narrative a little bit for my act, but it was technically homeschooled until I was in 6th grade. And then I entered the public school system in the 6th grade, having never gone to school before. Yeah, it's very Mean Girls. And then I went to school 6th and 7th grade. I skipped the 8th grade, and I did go to a public high school. So it was actually perfectly half and half, like 6 grades, first 6 grades homeschooled, and then 6 grades in public school. I mean, it was, I think there's this like weird therapy quote, like the wound is where the gold is. It's like terrifying and horrible in some ways, but it's also really, really great in some ways. And I think who I am has a lot to do with being homeschooled, or frankly, just not coming up in like the public school system or an institution. But I grew up very religious. So it was this weird, I think it shaped this very ambivalent relationship that I have with institutions in general, because my parents were religious. So it was very much about not being indoctrinated by the public school system, but, being indoctrinated by the church.
Right.
And I would say, ironically, it was sort of like the gift of that was also that, being, at least they were brave enough to like do such a radical experiment based on like their beliefs, that it sort of taught me to do this thing, which sort of like to, a lot of decisions that don't align with how I grew up. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
And just the logistics, like I had, I just can't, maybe it has a lot to do with like me having such a hard time having regular jobs. I had day jobs forever. Frankly, I barely quit my day job right before the pandemic. So I worked in retail and coffee and a lot of more like active customer service serving jobs. And then I worked in startups for a while. And being in an office was so hard for me.
Yeah.
And I realized I'm like, oh, that's the ruse. That's the system. Like kids grow up in public school. They've been used to sitting in desks all day. And when you have that for a year, and I was just missing a big chunk of that.
Mm-hmm,
and I just did not take it for granted that people are supposed to sit quietly for 8 hours a day. So, it was so much of it was a gift. And I was really lucky enough to, if it was a nice day, my mom would be like, let's just go do school at the beach, or like, let's go to the park. And I was just, I always joke around. I was just like a little feral child covered in peanut butter, loving Jesus. And then, strap that to a backpack and put it in a structured learning environment and see what happens.
Yeah, that's a huge change. And then of course you get adopted by a feral man that teaches you clowning. So it all comes full circle.
I've had many father figures in my life. Our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ.
Shout out.
Incendiary European clown, Dr. Brown. Yeah.
I love that. I want to know about your writing workshops. I'm definitely going to sign up. I love it. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Oh yeah. I just started these in January. We just finished our second session, and I was honestly just mainly thinking about looking for another stream of income. I did my first TV writers room last year. That was great, but that kind of work, not to get into the whole WGA stuff, but that kind of work is very hard to sustain year round. So I'm doing some TV writing. I'm writing freelance. I'm actually I still do commercials. I, obviously make money off of performing live and stand up. And I needed something. I honestly was just sort of thinking about, I've done a lot of non-glamorous stuff, just like copywriting and editing, because I am just, I've been a journalist and an art critic for still at least 5-7 years longer than I've been a comedian. So that's just a very solid skill set that I have. And I was thinking about how to monetize that. So I was signing up for, just copy editing work, general editing work. And then a friend of mine was like, why don't you just teach a workshop? Like there are so many people who might appreciate that. And I know a lot of writers who do teach workshops, but they're doing like fiction or memoir or poetry. And those are not genres that I'm super skilled or versed in. The only form of writing that I know I could teach or have a lot of expertise to share, is cultural criticism. And I'm like, I can't imagine people want to take that for fun. But
some of us do.
I've been so incredibly blessed and surprised, because also, a friend of mine, I had it's scary to start like a new business. I'm really trying to now, after 2 workshops, I'm realizing I love it. And there seems to still be continued demand. So I am kind of like formalizing it as like one aspect of sort of my business writ large. So I'm like, okay, I need to have maybe an assistant or get a little bit more scheduling stuff together. A friend I was like, just do it, just see it, what happens. It only took me like 20 minutes to make the sign up form. Like the worst that can happen is no one signs up and I'm in the exact same spot. Right. It only took like 20 minutes to make the sign up form, but then, and then like it's the first one like sold out in a day. Which was great and so surprising. I was like, oh my God. And I was like, oh shit, now I have to design a whole workshop.
Oh. Here comes part 2.
Yeah, which is actually great. It's just funny because I forget, because to me it's also just kind of a day job. But I'm like, oh yeah, this is, so many times we don't like trust our own expertise, or like the things that really well, you take them for granted and you forget this is actually valuable information for other people. And a lot of it is also just, people needing permission and validation that like, no, these ideas aren't crazy. No, this is good. Yes, you can be mad about this. Like, and here's how we're going to talk about it. I love it. And I definitely will continue to do them probably like 3 or 4 times a year, or as long as the demand continues. And what I love about it, and I think what's part of it's worth the price of admission alone, is because of my background, because of my weird paths, like through the art world and then into comedy and the industry. The groups tend to be this really great mix of like academics and comedians, or like journalists and clowns. And it's really, really just amazing. Like just those people who would just normally not be talking to each other. So just to have that group together talking about each other's work and like asking questions is it's so cool and it's so valuable. And it makes me feel that I did something right, sort of being at this nexus where I could bring people from these different worlds together.
Yeah.
And it tends to be a mix. Cool. Yeah, it's like a mix of like people who are actually very experienced writers, some teachers and academics, but who want to loosen up a little bit more in their writing. And then also a mix of like really great clowns and comedians who are obviously writers of a kind, but want to be a little more just figure out their point of view, or who want to be more like critical in their comedy. And I think the important thing is, it's not school. So there's definitely structure, but I'm also like, it's up to you, like how you're going to get your money's worth. Like I'm not going to babysit you or force you to like share or do your workshop time, because I'm like, if it's worth it to you to just like pay money and then like watch the Zoom, that's you. Or if you want to like, you get as much out of it as you put into it. And I think that helps loosen people up too. Sometimes I think we're still caught people are still get caught in the school mode, and they email me and they're like, I'm sorry, I'm going to be late, or I'm going to do, I'm like, are you
going to deduct points? Is this extra credit?
There's literally nothing that you have to do in this class to please me. And yeah. I don't know. I cannot emphasize that enough. And I think that comes from not really growing up in a school environment and figuring out what it means to have enough structure so that it's productive, but admitting that like we're all adults, we're not in school anymore. I was lucky enough to, as socialized as I became in the school system, I was lucky enough in college, when I eventually did finally finish college at UC Berkeley. Yes. No bigs. I had this one teacher. I took this like really, this is even funnier. I had so much like internalized racism about like being Mexican, and I think, these were like, and how Spanish was like not a beautiful language. I mean, these were things that were actually said in my home, that like Mexican Spanish isn't real Spanish, like French is a beautiful language, like just that whole European shit. So I ended up studying French in college. And I had one teacher who was this like a stereotype of like an old French guy who taught like this film theory class about Jean-Luc Godard. And his name was Ulysses Dutroux, and he was very like, he was like a Marxist film guy. So he was very much, the class was like, he didn't want it to be run in the normal hierarchical, teacher up here, student here way. So he was teaching these theories about Marxism and film, but he was like, I have to run my class this way in order to put them into practice. So there was like no tests, there was no papers. It was really like we had films that we would watch, and then the only really requirement of the class is that each day a different student would be in charge of facilitating the discussion, in French. So it's very, what do I say, like lateral, like horizontal. He was really like putting his ideas into practice. And I could see it on the first day when he was explaining how the class was. I could see kids freaking out.
They're like, oh my God, but what's due?
He literally said, he goes, if you need, I can't even do his accent anymore because it's funny. Now I am taking Spanish lessons. So this is, all the French is going away. But he was like, if you are an attentive American student who cannot achieve orgasm unless you are being tested, okay, I give you a test. Like, I have nothing against orgasm, But it's true. Some people like they can't, they need something. They always need something to like bounce their self-worth off of.
Yeah, I need a grade, I need points, I need percentages, I need a smiley face, I need a stamp, whatever it is, give it to me.
He literally was like, I don't want you to explode, so I guess like if you really need a test that badly, I can like give you one.
I love that. Yeah. Well, this has been such a treat to talk to you. I just have four rapid fire fun questions to end on. The first one is, and especially as you're learning your Spanish and learning these words, you might see in soccer games, there's a matraca, noisemaker, Mexican noisemaker. So for something fun. So what is something you're celebrating? It could be big, it could be small. I mean, anything that you like that's worth celebrating. What's something you celebrate?
I mean, there's so much. I just finished a new draft of my pilot last night and I really like it.
Yes.
And and I got an accountant for the first time in my life, and I'm going to deal with this mountain of personal financial bullshit that has been sitting in a pile of papers for years. Celebrating filming a documentary that's going to be released in the fall, I think, that I can't really talk about, but there's a lot.
Yeah. Great things happening. I love that.
Thank you.
And then what goes in la basura? What is trash? What is something you're done with, you're canceling? Concept, place, thing, anything.
Oh my gosh. Todo. I don't know. Like it took so long, but I finally feel like I'm getting to the place where I'm like really losing my fucks. And I think when we talk about institutions, it's like I really cannot give a shit anymore about like doing something that I don't really want to do because I need the validation of like this fellowship, this institution, this booker at this comedy club. What goes in la basura is like just trying to impress people that I don't even like or respect. Yes. And we do that so automatically. It's the same as, it's so much like, oh, I need to, do they like me? Do they like me? Do they think I'm funny? Do they respect what I do? And it's hardly ever like, do I like them? Do I think they're funny? Do I even care enough about who they are to care that if they think I'm funny? Yeah.
Perfect perspective. And then what is one way that you get your calma or stay grounded? How do you stay grounded and centered?
I've been doing yoga every single day for the past few months. That's a little new for me. I did it this morning. And I take a dance class one day, a couple of days a week, which is big for me in terms of just like, because what I do is so physical. So I need to do a lot of like restorative body stuff, yoga every day, and then the dance class. But for me, what's important about the dance class, I posted like a little 5-second thing the other day is that it's like, it's for me. I have videos of it, but I don't really post them. So
it's just for you, the movement, the dancing. Well, I want to thank you so much for stepping away from all that writing to talk to us today. This was, again, such a treat. How can people keep up with you? Where should they connect with you?
I'm most active on Instagram. It's xtina_Catherine on Instagram. There, I have a link to my website and all that stuff. Website is great if you want to do like a deep dive. I have a lot of my writing and videos up there, but Instagram is where I'll most likely post most frequently about upcoming shows and things like that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This was awesome. I hope you have a beautiful weekend.
You too. Thank you for having me.
This is great. Oh,
I hit my elbow. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
The funny bone.
The funny bone.
All right. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
That was such a great conversation. So Brenda, I want to ask you, I know that during the break you got to go travel to South America, Brazil, Argentina, I don't even know where else, but I know that during that trip you got to hang out with the Tamarindo Amigi. So how was that? Tell us about it.
Yes. First of all, very quick side note. If you travel to Argentina, which I was warned, so the person that I spoke to is Ingrid Cruz, who is a comic that we love, and she's done some collaborations with us. She's friends with a bunch of our friends, and she's a writer, and she's featured us in certain things. So a big time amigi. But she also gave me amazing tips about going to Argentina, especially the big tip that I forgot, which is that there's zero spice in that country. Nothing spicy. She told me to bring my own tapatio, and I've been hoarding little packets of tapatio for this trip, and I fucking forgot them.
Zero spice, y'all.
It was horrible.
Was it worth going?
No, honestly, I mean, it took a while. Argentina, it took me a while to warm up to it, mainly because of the food, mainly because no tienen nada de sabor.
So because you got tired of eating steak and pasta?
Yes.
Girl, I've been, and
yes,
I
you know what I'm talking about.
After a few days, I'm like, do y'all eat anything else? Oh my God. Like the steak was good and cheap. You know what I'm saying? But well, it's
not cheap anymore. That's the other.
That
was the other thing that was disappointing.
It used to be really cheap back in. This was like 10 years ago, but
yeah, but the city eventually it did grow on me, and I did find it. It has its charm. It has its own charm, and I understand why. It's Europe. It is Europe. It is not Latin America. That's kind of the feeling, the vibes that I got. Yeah. But it was really, really awesome to get to hang out with Ingrid. She gave me so many tips, like so many places to go. The reason she knew a lot about Buenos Aires is because she had lived there before for several years. But she's living there again. And the reason she's living there again is because of medical needs, because the United States is really expensive, especially when it comes to medical things that you might need medically. And especially if you're a freelance writer, there's just no way that we don't, without insurance and with insurance, things are just incredibly expensive. So I find that to be fearless, to choose to literally live in another country for a long time. But even more impressive, I think, is that putting yourself out there and doing stand-up comedy in another country, but to just do stand-up comedy in a language that I know that, those of us that grew up in the States, we struggle with, but to do the comedy there, these are the reasons why I find Ingrid to be just so admirable and so fearless. And other folks that might follow her on social might know she's been very public about this, about being we've talked about generational trauma. We've talked about mental health. She's like many people has experienced sexual assault from somebody in her own family, and also not feeling the support from her family. That was another reason why it was important for her to set boundaries, literally several countries away from her family. We talk a lot about mental health on this show. We talk a lot about taking up space. And so I'm just excited that I had an opportunity to talk to Ingrid. This is just a brief conversation, but y'all get to hear a little bit about her. And I got to ask her, how did she go from writing into comedy? And it turns out that she had some messages from the universe. We love that, right? We like the universe telling us to do things. So a lot of folks had told her, you need to do stand-up. You're really, really funny. She is really, really funny. And my exposure to her comedy has been mainly on Twitter. And I find her tweets hilarious. In fact, that's how we became friends with her, is that we shared one of her tweets, and it got a lot of attention, and that's how our worlds collided, from Twitter to meeting in person in Buenos Aires. It was wonderful. But I asked her how she got into it. So folks told her, you need to do comedy. But she also pitched an idea it was a business article. So as a freelance writer, sometimes you have to pitch the idea of what you want to write about. So her story was I want to talk about the business of comedy. I want to talk to Latino comics and talk to them from a business sense. What does it take to be a comic? Financially, what is the business insight? And she spoke to some folks that have been on the show, including Aida Rodriguez, who we love and has connected us to some great comics. So I love just, the way the world, the way things just kind of interconnect. So we're going to hear a little bit about how she got into comedy and how that interview and conversation with Aida Rodriguez eventually led to her stepping into comedy. So let's hear from Ingrid now.
I'm looking at these classes and I realized stand-up is one of the options.
Like the universe, the second message from the universe that this is for you.
Yeah. But also, I had a grant that I got in 2020 for my artwork that someone nominated me for. And I paid taxes on the grant. And I didn't know that that wasn't taxable income, so I got like a big refund.
Oh, hey.
And I had the money to take like art classes and these things. So it was like a combination of I had the money to do it and it wasn't gonna, kill my budget. And then I remember like, oh, like Aida, like all these comedians. So I signed up for the class and I was like, well, let's see what stand-up is. And it was fun. And then I went to the Immigrant Alliance for Justice and Equity to do like a 10-minute stand-up routine, which I get there, they're like, you have 2 minutes.
Oh, no.
And
that's
then,
quite a difference.
Yeah. And then they're like, by the way, the microphone isn't working. So I had, those loudspeakers.
Oh, my goodness.
And I had to yell the whole set. And it was really interesting. And that was like my 3rd week doing stand-up.
And I happen to know, because this is the same story that you told for our live storytelling event, but this is also a story about becoming a citizen, right? Becoming a citizen from El Salvador. You're already a citizen of El Salvador, but getting the citizenship of the U.S. and what that experience was like. So I've really enjoyed getting to hear that story, and it's really been not that long that you've been in this world.
No.
But I want to go back to, you are also a writer, you're also a journalist, and it sounds like even just having to cover this really interesting angle of interviewing comedians and their business sense. So tell me, what else do you write about? What do you enjoy writing about? Tell me about your world as a journalist.
Yeah. Right now, I've been trying to get into more culture writing. So with Latina Media Co, I've gotten to cover just a lot of just do essays about things I care about. Like I did one recently about Aubrey Plaza and how she's deadpan and gave us a lot of permission to do that. And I think a lot of people actually wrote similar essays around the same time. But it's just that impact has been so powerful, and now there's more actors who are empowered to be the same way. Also, last year I wrote in the Muse about how people of color and other marginalized people can't always afford to do quiet quitting.
Yeah, of course. No. When we talk about quiet quitting, it is definitely coming from a place of privilege.
Yeah,
100%. Yes,
yeah.
There's many jobs where they're like you literally cannot quiet quit. You can't quiet quit cleaning a house.
No,
you can't quiet quit taking care of a loved one.
Yeah.
So yes, I think that it would be very exciting to see more coverage about the way we talk about self-care, the way we talk about quiet quitting, the way we talk about anti-capitalism, in that we can be critical of those things while also acknowledging and doing the work it takes so that more of us can be included in those conversations and that applying to them as well. What is one thing that you're celebrating? We call it our matraca on this show because it's the Mexican noisemaker. So it could be big, it could be small. What's one thing that you're celebrating right now?
I have 2 avocados in the house that are at the correct ripeness.
Oh my gosh, we better get back to your house. Otherwise, they might not be by the time this interview is over. And then what goes in la basura? What's something that you're done with, you're canceling?
Really terrible procrastination. I've actually been working on exercises, organizing exercises to help me with that. So that definitely has to go in the trash.
Procrastinating. What are some of those tips? I'm very curious about this.
So actually for around the house, there's a TikToker, I forgot her handle, but if you look for the 610 list, it's some mom who wrote a list of 6 daily chores you need to do and then 10 weekly chores, and that keeps your house at maintenance level. Mm-hmm. Oh, it's Organized Chaos. I think that's her handle. And so I was randomly on TikTok wasting time, procrastinating actually.
Right.
Sometimes procrastination is useful though. And so I just kind of modified her chore list because hers is made for a house and a family. So I modified it for a single person in a studio. And that's been really helpful because it really does take 10 to 15 minutes to just do some of these things. And my house is already cleaner.
I got to give this a try. I love it. Okay. And then How do you stay grounded? How do you, you're juggling freelance jobs. You're also a musician. You're also a comedian. You're in this country alone with friends, of course, but your family's far away. Your LA roots are far away. So how do you stay grounded? How do you get your calma?
Yeah, I like to read in the subway, and I carry a book around with me because everyone in Buenos Aires is always running late. So now I just use it like to catch up on reading. And then I try to practice yoga or qigong as much as I can. I just feel like meditation, like real meditation where you sit down, is really hard for me. So instead, I like to have movement.
Beautiful. Yeah. And what are you reading right now?
Right now, I'm reading Paula by Isabel Allende.
Are you enjoying it?
Yeah, it's really sad. And it's also really interesting because she's from Chile. But since she's been living in San Francisco for such a long time, when people from Chile say she's one of our authors, and I'll be like, okay, but I'm from California. She's one of our authors
there you
too.
Go.
And we argue about that. And then we just have avocados. That's one thing we have in common.
I love it. Where can people keep up with you? What's the best way to follow your work?
Yeah, I'm right now. So I recently changed all my handles because I realized there's not too many people with my middle name. So it's Ingrid Cruz, like across Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, and YouTube. So I put like, so Instagram is more like my photography, and sometimes I do reels. I have like a bunch of sketches that I just do randomly on TikTok. And then I use Twitter for work, but sometimes I try to put funny stuff there too because, yeah, you got to have some jokes in life.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. It was so much fun to be able to do this here in Buenos Aires in a beautiful studio. So Thank you for spending some time with me this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you. And also, I want to give a shout out to Madeline Leon, who hooked us up with a studio.
Yeah, okay. Sounds good.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that's our show. It was a good one. I hope y'all subscribe, share, all those things.
Yeah, that's it, y'all. And as always, we put so much into this, so we always love your support in whatever form feels good to you. We appreciate it. Review, share, donate, keep us going, y'all. Our love, your love, and our love keeps
our love to you.
Our love to you. All right, y'all. Nos vemos next week.
All right.
Abrazos, besos. Ciao.
Ciao. Tamarindo Podcast is Brenda Gonzalez and Ana Sheila Victorino, with production support from Josie Melendez and Augusto Martinez Delgado of Sonoro Media. Our theme song is by Jeff Ricards. If you like our show, please rate and review Tamarindo Podcast or share an episode with a friend.